Hello and welcome back to Coast FC, the Canadian soccer podcast focused on all things CPL, Canadian Championship, and more. My name is Felipe and Mike.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And today we are discussing the great finale, the outcome of the 2024 CPL season. That is correct. The regular season is now over. All of the 28 matches have been played. Now we are awaiting the playoffs, and they're coming very fast. It's not like we're waiting a little while for it. Literally Wednesday, we have our first match. And at the time of recording, it's Monday. So we barely even got time to breathe after the climax of the regular season. But we are going to dive into all of the action that went through. We are going to do a little bit differently today, where instead of going game by game, we're going to be talking over some of the major points of all four games and of how all 8 teams finished their season. We will be doing a full sort of post-mortem episode about each team's season after the playoffs are done, so we won't go too in depth, but we will talk about the results and what they mean for the teams and go into a little bit about what they might mean for the future. We'll also go over a little bit of a preview for Wednesday's match, the sort of play-in match between York United and Pacific FC, and we'll finish off with a little bit of fun by going over our preseason predictions and seeing which one of us two had the worst predictions. And given what I've already seen, it's going to be a little bit of a doozy there, Mike, but a lot to get into this episode. But before we dive into all of it, remember to follow us on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC, as well as finding us on YouTube under the same name to see the visual side. Now, Mike, it was a wonderful time for you because I think this was the first time all season where you got to watch all 4 matches at a reasonable hour.
Yeah, being able to spread them across different devices, able to tune in and watch all at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. Perfect viewing for the UK audience.
Exactly. You didn't have to wait to rewatch games that were happening at 3 or 6 a.m.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was great for you and great for all those that are watching outside.
Thank you, Canada.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, One Soccer, for that one. But we did get to see all 4 matches. We were messaging throughout as we were watching all of the matches. And one of the biggest ones that we were focusing on, obviously, was the game between Pacific FC and the Halifax Wanderers. And
One Soccer went with the Ottawa Vancouver game, didn't they? Which wasn't the most exciting of the 4, I guess.
No, it wasn't. No, it was Pacific FC and Forge. I don't know why I was thinking Pacific FC and Halifax. It was Pacific FC and Forge. It was the 1-0 win of Pacific FC over Forge FC, and a massive result for Pacific on that one because what it meant. They finally clinched 5th place with that one. They have now 2 wins over playoff rivals in the last couple of games to secure that final spot in the postseason, and they immediately ended the dreams and hopes of Vancouver FC and Valour FC, regardless of what their matches was, with this massive win. I will be honest, I didn't think really that Pacific were going to finish the season as well as they have been. I remember a few weeks ago, we had completely counted Pacific out of the playoff fights. And lo and behold, they've turned it around, and now we look like fools by doing so. But a really good performance from Pacific. Obviously, to beat the regular season champions. Yes, you could say that they're already focused on the playoffs, but still, it wasn't an easy game. Dario Zanata has stepped up quite, hugely for Pacific FC in the last few weeks. Him and Moses Dyer and even Rion Moore, 2 weeks ago, and it was a performance that allowed Pacific to come back to a victory. So it's been pretty good for Pacific overall in the last few weeks, and they'll be going up against York United first, as we mentioned, on Wednesday, and I feel like they can feel pretty confident going into it. Mike, what did you make of Pacific in the last game and how they finished the season, and then their hopes going into the playoffs?
Yeah, I think like the York game's more of like a telling of where Pacific are at, because I mean the Pacific game was played. The Forge match was played over YouTube. You can see the comments and people mentioning like, "Where are the crowd? These Pacific fans only come out for the big games." It's like, I'm not sure. Maybe check the weather. It looked awful. Forge looked like, oh come on, I just want to get back. Like we got to play through this. But Pacific have like in these, like you say, when we fought, we can count them out. They've got become a much more functional side over this, like as the season's worn on. They've seemed to have like ditched this. We're going to try and dominate possession and try and overwhelm the opposition with our just constant passing and movement and try to look for like 60-70% of the possession throughout the game. They've adapted to what their team is, what their players are best at, and it's getting a little bit better out of them. And like them, all you can ask for when going into the playoffs is a bit of momentum. They seem to have got that. I mean, TMG got their supporters group player of the year, and like he was vital to them. He's really been a bit of a rock at the back, and they dad Luke has been a little bit less up and down the pitch. Greco Taylor's fitted in really well as a young player, and whoever's partnered in the centre of defence after losing Ali and Dom, it's hasn't been smooth sailing, but it seems slightly better in these last two games of giving them a bit of a calmer presence, which might help them going into these playoff matches.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of players have stepped up recently, and I think that's helped a lot. Obviously, as well, you got to take in consideration the injuries that have plagued Pacific FC. They had that hot start because everyone was fit, and then they started to have injuries upon injuries upon injuries, some worse than others, and it started to hamper the momentum and the flow of the team. They had the really bad midseason slump that event, evidently was as bad enough for us to completely discount them from the playoffs. But I think their recovery from this, from that slump, is something that you got to really commend the players and James Merriman for, because it wasn't easy. Vancouver FC looked pretty much locked to have that place, and even when things started to look a little dicey, you still maybe backed a little bit more Valour or backed a little bit more Halifax to steal it from Vancouver because of the previous form from Pacific. But all credit to them and the organization. They bounced back really well. Yeah, like you mentioned. I don't know if people were aware that BC was in an atmospheric river, a massive storm on the weekend. As someone who lives it, I felt it. I'm surprised anyone went at all. That's how bad it was. So those who did went, that shows the passion that they have there in Langford. But I feel like for Pacific FC, themselves and York United have the toughest route to the CPL final, with how many games they have to play. They have to play pretty much every available match except for first versus second. And so if they want to get all the way to the final. And so I feel like it's going to be really about who is the most united, who is the most focused, who's the most concentrated. And with the form that they're on right now, with the fact that they've been able to secure wins against Forge, secure a win against York, it shows that they are capable of beating some of their playoff rivals, and confidence plays a huge part in how people perform in the playoffs. And I feel like with Pacific right now, I don't know if you could necessarily call them the dark horse, but I wouldn't be opposed if somebody did say that, because of the form that some players have been in. Like I mentioned, Nata and Dyer, but also you mentioned TMG. He had that fantastic ball that led up to the goal, and I feel like, Pacific, their game plan against Forge was really good. They allowed Forge to have possession, because we know Forge like to have possession, but they caught them out on the break. They played very direct, and that's where they got the goal. And then they were defensively sound, that we know they can be when they're on it. So I think Pacific can take a lot of positives from this end of the season, and fancy themselves to go deep into the playoffs. I think when you look at the form that York United have, that we'll talk about in a little bit, and the form that they have, probably say, even though they are going to York United, where York United have been quite good at home, probably say that Pacific might have the edge going into it.
Yeah, well, they won there just a very short while ago, and York seem a little bit disjointed at the moment. And Pacific, they've got their faults, they've got their difficulties, but they seem to be brilliant. Like I say, just been a bit more functional. Bring it back to the bare bones, and let's just do what we do. These are the bits we're good at. Let's try and attack games that way. It's been not the most exciting, I guess, for neutrals, and they're probably not drawing in the fans at the moment, especially when it's pouring down with rain with the style of football. But it's starting to be a little bit more effective, and we'll see what they can do.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting how they perform on Wednesday away from home. It's a repeat, but a slight change from last season's playing match, because last time it was Pacific in fifth, York United in fifth and Pacific in fourth, and Pacific managed to get the job done at home, but now they have to do it away from home at York United, where York United have, I think, the second best form right now in terms of home form. I think, they have in 14 games, 7 wins, 3 draws, 4 losses. So just behind Forge, who has an incredible home form. We don't have to talk about Forge's home form too much. So it will be a challenge, but I kind of back them to at least give York a very, very good run for their money there. But now let's talk about the two teams that Pacific broke hearts of in the VFCs, and Vancouver FC and Valour FC. Coincidentally, the team that I cover and the team that you have a lot of love for. And both of them did not make the playoffs. We have been talking about these two teams at length the last few weeks. So we won't go too deep. We'll wait for the postmortems to talk more about them. But both have missed the playoffs. Both come in, I guess, with different kind of scenarios that they've had to go through, different challenges, but with the same result of finishing once again, surprisingly, in the bottom two. It was like for like in terms of where each team finished. Vancouver FC finished 7th again, and Valour finished bottom again. Obviously, a lot tighter than last season. Basically, came all the way to the final day, but the results are the same. The facts are the facts. How disappointing of a season do you think this is for both teams? And we talked about potential changes, changes at the helm, potential personnel changes in terms of players. How much change do you think this will elicit from the teams, given that if you look at it very harshly, if you look at it solely on paper, not really that much progress from either team?
No, and that's the biggest problem, is it? No progress at all, really, and big changes in personnel, like in playing personnel, especially for both, could well happen again. So hard to keep, like, both teams struggle with getting fans in like through the turnstiles, and when you don't know who you're going to be supporting and you don't know who's going to be putting on your kit like at the beginning of the season, it makes it very difficult. It's two teams without an identity, really, that are still trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a massive point that I think we both talked about, identity. I think that's a huge point that both teams will have to go into. I think to keep it brief, because I know both of us, we can talk about this for an hour about each team. Let's go over one positive thing that maybe each team can expect going into 2025 based on this 2024 season, and one maybe negative thing or a concerning element going into 2025 that the teams need to address in this postseason. Let's start with Valour. And so I will ask you, what do you think is one positive thing that we saw from Valour this season that will give you a little bit of optimism going into 2025? And I know there are many, but find one negative thing that
Yeah.
you can spot going into 2025.
So I think see like the changes that were made from the beginning of the season through till mid-season when they could make those sort of additions, they improved themselves. Maybe going more home games obviously probably helped. But they did bring in Mla, Kwemi. They changed to the 4-4-2 and they got a bit more success, especially compared to that opening weekend with the back three. So there were slight improvements in the way they were playing. It still wasn't perfect, and it still was hectic, and it could still go terribly wrong as it did, especially in the last 20 minutes on a number of occasions. But there was an improvement in the season. But then I don't know whether that's just explains how bad they were when they started. But that's that for me. There's if you're going to try and take a positive from it, that's you can say that maybe that those little additions and the settling into a style could improve next year if they persist with it. It's not a negative. It's probably absolute panic. It's what I've got it down as the negative. Is that when Demi Antonoglu wasn't available, they lost a third of they lost one side of their attack and defense. Like it was gone. I can't imagine he's going to come back next year. Like bigger teams will want him, and he's probably got a career going forward. Who knows? Who knows outside of the league what his plans are and what option he's got, but how you replace him next year. I mean, he was the leading assist provider this year, I think, in the CPL, and that's from the bottom team. That shows how important he was, the left back in the worst team in the league.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. I feel like Tim Antonoglu he's also a very young player too. So he's going to be looking to probably make that next step. So I too will be surprised if he stays with Valour next season. And it's a similar situation to last season when they lost Matteo Debrien.
Yeah.
They got lucky, or they had a very good recruitment there and finding a replacement for Debrien, a different kind of player than Debrien, but still someone as impactful as Debrien was for Valour. So I feel like for them, they'll just need to try to probably starting right now look for what the replacements will look like, because I wouldn't be surprised if already they started to get offers for him literally the day after the end of the season.
Yeah. Well, he's on loan, isn't he, from Toronto?
Right, he's on loan here. I was thinking that he was.
I don't think they'll be able to get him on loan again. I think Toronto will look for if Toronto are looking to loan him out, I think they'd look for a better option to help him continue his development.
That's very true. Yeah. So even more reason. Yeah, they need to find somebody maybe more permanently than to fill that gap. But yeah, I think you're right in that's kind of to be able to have a player with that kind of creativity that can have that many assists and you can rely on is great. But you can't put all your eggs in one basket.
No.
You need to have other players that can contribute, other players that can step in if a player of Temi's quality isn't available or isn't there or is injured or suspended or isn't even just playing well. You need other players to kind of step up and take the mantle. And yeah, we could very much feel the difference between Valour when they had Temi Antonoglu and Valour when they did not have Temi Antonoglu. I think that's one of the things that they will need to address going into 2025. While for Vancouver, if I had to look at some of the positive things going into it, I mean, yes, they did miss the playoffs. Seems almost criminal given that I think they were in playoff positions for out of the 28 match days. I might be wrong here, but I think for like 23 or 24 of the match days, they were in playoff spots. And then only in the last 4 or 5, maybe even 6 match days, they've completely let it slip. And that's obviously a cause for concern. But if you look at the end of the season, they got 4 straight draws, and 2 of them, they got clean sheets. They've only conceded 2 goals in 4 games. Defensively, which was a huge problem for them throughout the season, they seem to have figured it out. It's just the attack that needs a little bit more there, right? But I mean, we're kind of clutching at straws here.
You also Callum Irving, like you cannot expect him to have the same games again. Like some of those performances were unreal.
I mean, he broke the CPL record for most saves in a regular season with 95, which is a great thing to see, in the sense of, your keeper can save a lot, but also that's not what you want to have as a club, a record of. And it's like, oh, we allowed the most shots for a keeper to save ever is not really what you want to see. So definitely, I feel like in the last few games, Irving has been huge, but also they've been a little bit better defensively. They're showing signs of improvement, which is good. The only problem with that is that we said the same thing last season, right? When they won 3 out of the last 4 matches, I think it was, after torrid first season. We said, okay, these are the improvements. This is what they need to build on for 2025. It looked like they did, and then it all kind of spiraled out. And so I guess the one negative thing, if I had to pick only one, is their home form, really.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things go into that, but if you look at their home form from this season, they have the worst home form of any team. Only 4 wins, and I'm pretty sure 3 out of the 4 wins were within the first 3 or 4 weeks. And so they pretty much have like 3 points out of their last 7 or 8, maybe 9 home games, which is, inexcusable. That just can't be it. You have to take advantage of the home games. Majority of their points were taken, like in the second half of the season, were taken away from home.
Yeah.
And that's, great that you're doing well away from home, but you have to make the home advantage work. You look at Forge, you look at why they steamrolled the league in the second half of the season, is because no one could beat them at home. No one was capable of beating them at home until they already won it, and then they just stopped caring.
Yeah.
That's something that Vancouver FC needs to do better, because not just from a sporting perspective in terms of where they can finish, because if they just turned a few of those losses or draws at home into wins, then they would be comfortably in the playoffs. But it was because of those really poor home performances that they find themselves in situations that they find themselves in. And that kind of points, I think, to a bigger problem of just the mentality of the team. It feels like, especially at home, but even in other games, they just don't approach games properly, and they always have a tendency to make mistakes. And maybe it's because they still have a couple of young or inexperienced players, but even from some of the more experienced players, it just feels like when they put themselves into difficult situations, it's very hard to kind of pull themselves out of it. Though they did show a few times towards the end of the season that they are capable of turning things around when their backs are against the wall, but not consistently enough for me to feel confident in any game that they go into. And I think that's something that Afshin Gobbi, if he is to stick around, which honestly, from conversations that I've had, it's looking more and more likely like he will be sticking around. Whether that's deserved or not, I don't really know. But that's something that he needs to address going into 2025, is just the psychological consistency of his players. One thing I was watching from, I think it was One Soccer Today, is Vancouver FC have had 45 players play for them in their last 2 seasons, which is more than any other team in the same time frame. So we talk about identity, we talk about consistency. I feel like that also plays into it. So I think there's a lot of things and issues that go into why Vancouver FC didn't make the playoffs. But, it all kind of stems around that psychological issue, and obviously just being so poor at home, which is not going to get, like you mentioned, bums in seats. It's not going to get people through the turnstiles, and it's a long-term issue that needs to be addressed now before it starts to become a really big, serious issue for the organization as a whole. So I think that's something that, the team will definitely need to look to improve ahead of next season.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah.
But let's move on to something now a little bit more positive. After talking
Yeah.
about the disappointments of the VFCs, let's talk about the new Golden Boot winner from out of nowhere, like
Mm.
Randy Orton, RKO in the last game of the season, Tobias Warchewski, who got his 11th and 12th goal of the season in the final day. He returns to the league in style by becoming the league's top goal scorer. And I would like to remind our listeners, and even Mike, is that remember when we were talking about him before the season, we weren't really sure because he hadn't
No.
played competitively for
Mm.
18 months.
Yeah.
And we were worried about how quickly he would get up to speed. Well, it might have taken him a little bit, and there might have been some spells where he didn't score. But overall, I think we can say he got back into the league, and it looked like he was never really that far away from it. It was an
No.
impressive performance in their match, and yeah, I feel like obviously against Valor it hurts, but you gotta commend the team of
Yeah.
Cavalry. You gotta applaud when you can, and Warchowski, 2 really good goals, especially the first one on the half volley, and it's just been a resounding end of season from him, where we've talked about him before, where we've talked about how important he can be for Cavalry if he just kind of focuses on what he's good at.
Mm.
I've complained before when he was put on the wing or put on the 10. He's a striker. Just put him striker.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a genius. Maybe I'm not. I'm not. But he clearly does really well in the striker position because he scored a bunch of goals, and yeah, it's gonna be crucial for them going into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's not related to or a good friend of Warchewski could probably be forgiven for not knowing the quality of the football he's been playing since leaving Edmonton. So yeah, and at that point when we started, like Maya Bevan, we were expecting back, and he sort of came in as this. Okay, well, we assume he's the backup, and it's someone who's going to just push Maya Bevan, and we'll see. Yeah, we'll see what comes of this. But he's been one of the best players in the league. Like his all-round game is incredible. Like it's been brilliant. Like he holds the ball up well. He gets involved in build-up. He can finish. Like he can create chances himself. He can get on the end of them. He's had everything since coming, and he's just attacked it from the start. And like the CONCACAF games at the beginning of the season, like he's gone in and he's arrived and he started and he's performed against MLS sides quite well. Thought Cavalry did decently against Orlando, wasn't it? Looking back, I thought they did decently for a side that obviously hadn't played a competitive game like for a very long period. And yeah, credit to Tommy Warden Jr. I mean, either he's one of the few that have followed what Warchewski's been up to, or his agent deserves a lot of credit. And Tommy Warden Jr. gets a pass on a gamble well taken. Yeah, he's got, because he's so physical, quick, and gets involved in the game. He gives those other players a lot of opportunities to shine as well. And yeah, that doesn't happen every week. And yeah, Cavalry could probably score a lot more goals than they actually do as a whole. But when things start clicking, which they seem to be in this part, like going into the playoffs, they're really getting the best out of their players. They seem to have formed a really great partnership that could really push them on this year again.
Yeah, I feel like that, especially with that last one. I feel like Cavalry, we were talking about them. Remember when? Because they kept drawing. They were struggling to win. They were struggling to score. It never really felt like they were going to get going in the first half of the season. We did mention that, like the season before, it might take a little while before they click, but when they click, they'll be good. That ended up happening because Cavalry have been very, very solid in these last few weeks, and of course that has to do with Tobias Warchewski and the impact that he's had. But they've only had one loss in the league. I think in their last 10 games, 10, 12 games, they've only had one loss, and they've just been winning. And a lot of them have been classic Cavalry wins, obviously, of 1-0s, 2-1s, They had that 3-2 against Halifax, but aside from
Mm.
that, it's been classic Cavalry. But at the end of the day, a win is a win, and
Yeah.
they did have their nice big win against Pacific when they beat them 4-1. But it just feels like pretty much ever since July, they've just been, or like end of July, beginning of August, they've just been on a tear.
Yeah.
And Warchewski has been a huge part of that, but you also look at other players as well. We talked about Camargo. Ali Musi coming back was a huge boost to them
Mm.
when obviously the one of the MVP candidates is out for a good chunk of the season. You're going to
Yeah.
feel it. And then when he came back, it definitely felt his impact. And you look at Dan Klump, you look at, Mal Henry, how he was playing before he got injured. You look at the players that they did bring in late in the season as well, like Jay Herdman, Lowell Wright. They've had impacts as well. It just feels like the squad is in a really, really good place right now, going into the playoffs. Like I mentioned, with only that one loss to Forge at home, which I feel like that was, if you're going to expect any team to beat Cavalry, it's Forge at home. And now, speaking of that, they get to try to seek revenge for that game, but for last season, for the CPL final, and for the sort of the hosting round of the playoffs, which it will be a rematch between Forge and Cavalry this time, though not at Atco Field, but at Tim's Hortons Field. And you look at that match, Mike, and you look at the form that they've been on, and you got to say, Forge, they said they weren't going to take their foot off the pedal after they clinched the title, but then they have 2 straight losses. Kind of looks like they took the foot off the pedal. Question is, are they going to suffer for it? And are Cavalry going to take advantage of it? On one hand, you'd say yes, because form kind of matters, consistency going into it. But at the same time, you look at 2023, Forge also lost their last 2 games of the season against Halifax, and I think it was against Atletico Ottawa, where they also lost 1-0. And that was, I think Danny Morer scored in that goal. Or no, it was Iliadis. It was Iliadis that scored in that game. And Forge still went on to win the whole thing.
Yeah.
So you can't completely discount Forge, but even still, going into it, you think Cavalry have maybe a bit of an edge on Forge, given how good of a form they've been on lately, and having Tobias Warchewski kind of firing on all cylinders?
Yeah, I think they're in their best position to do something. They obviously found it hard last year and fell short. They've had their issues coming up, and Forge, like you say, have excellent home form. They've already qualified, and this happened last year as well. So you can't. Yeah, you've got to accept that. But I think Cavalry and probably in a much better position, despite the fact that they won everything last year, the regular season, and they got to take home some silverware. I feel that they're a stronger all-round side this year, and they're in a much better position to go against Forge, who are still working themselves out a little bit, which is really weird to say after they win the title, but the centre forward position isn't settled. So there are chances to get at them, and we'll see. Like I think I'd like to back Cavalry, but it is so hard with Forge's home form.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing going into it. You have a very tough challenge where Forge have been sort of not in their best form, but let's be honest, because they're focusing on their favorite time of year, which is the playoffs. And now the playoffs are here, and they're going to probably play their best football because they love to save the best for last, and they want to make it 5 out of 6 this season. And they very, very well will have the chance to have that in terms of the bracket. All they have to do is beat Cavalry, and they're already in the final again, hosting once again. And if they host the CPL final, be very, very tough for them to lose it, you'd imagine. So it's going to be a massive game on Sunday between these two sides. I feel like Cavalry, in the same sort of vein, they need to play their best match of the
Yeah.
season. They have to, because the only team that's been able to really get one over on them in this incredible vein of form has been Forge.
Yeah.
And it was in Tim Hortons field. So I feel like it's going to take everything that Cavalry have. And one of the biggest things is going to be focusing on staying on it throughout the 90 minutes. And even afterwards, if it goes to extra time, because that was the biggest thing with them last season. They weren't at it in the qualifying semifinal. They were at it, you could say, for a little bit towards the end of the CPL final, but kind of let it go a little bit. And that's where Forge love to strike. When they sense a little bit of weakness, a little bit of complacency, that's when Forge love to, kind of turn it up a notch and go in for the kill. So I think for Cavalry, they'll need to be just 100% focused. And yeah, Tobias Warchewski will need to have the game of his life, I think. And that one definitely will want to score a couple, or at least set up a couple in goals in that one, and just be that kind of spearhead for the Cavalry attack. So it can be a bit of a headache for the Forge center backs.
Yeah, definitely. Really exciting. Really exciting. Looking forward to that one.
Yeah, that was going to be I'm going to be once again looking particularly close at that one. And maybe at some plane tickets to Calgary if it goes the way that I want to, and if not, I'll be watching the CPL final from home yet again. So because the BC sides let me down, I'm hoping Calvary can kind of help me out here going to the CPL final for the first time. But let's talk about two teams that are going to be looking to be upsetters in the playoffs to try to knock off either one of Cavalry or Forge going into the final, and that is between Ottawa and York. I think we can be honest. Neither have been all that impressive in the last couple of weeks. We were talking about the gap between the top four and the bottom four, and it was a pretty big gap, a few weeks ago. Now doesn't really feel like it's all that much. It was basically 5 points that separated fourth and fifth, when before it was something like 8 or 10 points or something like that. And yeah, it just feels like both have been kind of stumbling into the playoffs. York United have lost 4 out of their last 5, only a 1-0 win over, coincidentally, Ottawa. Meanwhile, Ottawa only have 1 win in the last, I think it's 7 matches. They only have 1 win. The rest of them have been, I think, 5 draws, 1 loss, and again, only that 1 win against an already kind of distracted Forge away from home. So neither have been in fantastic forms going into the playoffs. Both are sort of struggling to create opportunities. Do you feel like either of them have, I guess, a good shout at upsetting a Cavalry or Forge, for whoever loses that qualifying semifinal, to maybe sneak into the finals? Obviously, York will have to do it twice, in terms of having to beat Pacific and then look to beat Ottawa away from home. So it'll be tougher for York than, let's say, an Ottawa. But if York do manage to get past Pacific, you kind of give stock to either one making it to the CPL final, or do you think that their recent form has kind of let them down a bit?
Yeah, I think you're being quite kind. I think they've stunk the place out. They've been so dull, and there's just nothing going for these sides. Maybe Ottawa have got a slightly better performances, despite picking up probably about as many points in the last 6 or 7 games. But they're just so hard to watch. In this Vancouver game with Ottawa, I think the first shot on target was well into the second half. And I think it was a Vancouver player who had it. I can't remember off the top of my head. That game was really difficult. And York, it's just, the same. Every so often, Shella Gimo has given us something to get excited about, but the rest of the team haven't. There's nothing for a neutral looking at those two sides now, with Pacific joining them in these two like early round playoff games, I don't see a huge difference in any of the three from the way they're playing in this last like month or two. Like Ottawa should be well ahead of these two sides, and we should be saying, well, that'll be comfortable, and it'll be Ottawa against one of the other two in the next round. It may well turn out that way, but when you look at it from the outside now, there's three teams that are better than three other teams, maybe, but they're nowhere near as good as the top two.
Yeah, and I feel like when you look at, again, I know we mention it all the time when we talk about Ottawa, but the expectations going into it with the super team that they managed to get in the offseason, you had higher aspirations. And we know that under Carlos Gonzalez, I think Ottawa don't really finish seasons all that well. But even still, you kind of expected something different this season, given the quality that they have in their team, especially the attacking quality that they have in their team. And the fact that goals have been sort of hard to come by, and their wins and the performances haven't been all that convincing in the second half of the season is a major concern. And like, yeah, on paper, they should be far and away ahead of all of the other 5 teams below them. You could say they should be way closer to Cavalry and Forge than they were. They'd be, even above them with all the talent that they have. I think going into the playoffs, obviously playoffs is a different beast because it's pretty much every game's a final. It's elimination playoff, and one mistake and you could be sent home. So with those high pressure stakes, maybe that's where these high quality players will thrive, and we'll see a completely different Ottawa side than we've seen in the more sort of, the lengthy, the kind of grueling regular season. But even still, I don't know if I back on Ottawa to in the semifinal ahead of the final, beat a Cavalry, beat a Forge to get to the CPL final. And then for York, it's sort of a similar thing where they had a new lease of life, obviously, when Benjamin Morta came in, and we praised them a lot for them. But then they kind of got a little tired. They kind of got maybe a little bit one-dimensional. They started to run out of ideas. They started to lose a lot of steam. They had to rely on a 16-year-old to create any amount of spark in these last few games. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that I feel like both teams are kind of struggling with right now that will maybe hamper their ability to make it all the way to CPL final. And as we mentioned, for York going into the game against Pacific, yes, they have the home ground advantage. That's not always been a great thing for them. Though this season, like I mentioned, they have the second best home form. So with that, it's definitely better than it was last season when they had to go to Starlight Stadium. But even still, it's not a given that they're going to win against Pacific, especially with the form going into it. I think Pacific have a lot more confidence, a lot more energy going into it, and it really will depend on if York can sort of stay focused, because in the game against Pacific where they lost it in the last 10 minutes. And in the game against Halifax this past weekend, it was the same thing. In the last 10-ish minutes, they lost the games. It's about that consistency throughout the 90 that, tiredness is not just the tiredness in your legs. It's also the tiredness of mind. It's switching off. It's thinking the job's done when it isn't. And then teams catch you by surprise. And then that's what happens. I think that'll be a massive thing for York United going into this game on Wednesday. And if they manage to beat Pacific, the game against Ottawa next week, because that's sort of the kryptonite that they've been dealing with, aside from their own attacking woes. I feel like, Brian Wright did so well for a large chunk of the season, being kind of quiet.
Whole new player, didn't he, at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, and still is number one in terms of goals and assists, in terms of combined with I think it was 15. but he needs to step up as well because he's been kind
Yeah.
of quiet the last few weeks, and coincidentally, that also goes with how quiet York United have been. So I feel like he is a player that needs to step up massively for them. Well, yeah, and let go Ottawa. A lot of players need to step up massively. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I back either one to kind of pull that upset off.
No, I mean, looking at it like on paper, you'd expect Ottawa to be the one to challenge, but honestly, like if you told me any one of these three teams was going into the next round, like to face, was going into the sort of semi-final, probably wouldn't be all that surprised.
Yeah. But before we move on to reacting to our season predictions that we made at the beginning of the season, let's spare a thought. Let's spare a little bit of time for Halifax Wanderers, who came into this match with nothing to play for, essentially, but nothing but pride.
Maybe a couple of jobs on the playing
maybe a
stuff.
couple of jobs. That's very true. Maybe a couple of jobs, maybe a couple of contracts.
Yeah.
But they were playing for pride, and I think they did themselves and their fans proud in this match. Like a good turnaround against York United, and they finish off the season on a high. They finish off a decent end to the season. They only had, I think, 2 losses in their last 8. They had I think 2 wins and then a bunch of draws. Not the worst from Halifax. I mean, they managed to pull themselves out of last place where they looked rooted to be there for the majority of the season to finish above Vancouver and Valour in 6th. Just on head to head, they went ahead of Vancouver FC. So it's a nice way, I think, to end what can only be described as a disappointing season. I know Patrice Geyser and some players were kind of talking about this game as like, this is the first game preparing for 2025. We're 7 months ahead. But there's still a lot of time between then and 2025. A lot of questions need to be answered. A lot of things need to be decided. A lot of things need to be decided in terms of the direction that the team wants to go for. I think one of the biggest questions that's being debated amongst a lot of people in the Wanderers fan base is if Patrice Geyser is still the answer. I know personally for me, I still think he is, and I think you probably think similarly, but you got to be honest as well. I think some of the criticism that's been placed against them, especially with how the team started in the first half of the season, is valid. And I think he has to, kind of have a lot of lessons being learned for himself based on the start of the season, especially with they had another season where they had a pretty high turnover, maybe not as high as when he first came in, but still a lot of new players coming in. He tried to change the system to a back 3, be a bit more kind of zonal. He learned a little bit from Vanni Sartini when he was here in Vancouver. I think he tried to change a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And then the team kind of struggled to gel as they were trying to find a medium in terms of an identity. They started to go back into their old identity, and it seemed to work, but still kind of turned into a little bit of too little, too late. And in the end, they were the first team eliminated. And it is disappointing, not only because last season they finished 3rd on away goal difference, but also because a lot of people, us included, which we'll talk about a little bit, had them to be this, resurgent Halifax side that would be pushing for the top 2 or 3 spots. Yeah. And the season did not pan out that way at all. So I feel like there are questions that Patrice Geyser needs to answer for in this offseason. And I don't think it's enough for him to get fired, but I do think it's enough for people to kind of hold him accountable that things need to improve.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, some of those bits of like self-inflicted wounds, which he's shown he's gone back to his preferred style of play from last season. We've seen improvements on them in their playing style. Questions still need to be answered about their discipline. Like it continued throughout the chunk of the season where red cards and bookings and were causing big issues for this team,
Mm.
and which was one of the reasons why they were the first ones to get eliminated when they're definitely not the worst team. The thing I find the most bizarre about Patrice Geyser is for someone who has such an attacking style of play, and who came into the league having broken records with Vaughan-Asori, I think, with the amount of goals that were getting scored in seasons when he was in charge there, and said, "This is what I know. I don't coach another way. This is what I know." I just find it bizarre how he doesn't seem to be able to find a striker. He's had a couple of seasons now to find the right striker, and they've been through quite a few over a very short period that really haven't worked out, and he needs to find someone to lead the line, because it's in like you can't rely on all those other attacking players. I think Aidan Daniels hasn't had the best season this year.
Disappointing, given how great of a season he had.
Yeah, I think again that was the style of play, and the fact there isn't someone focal in the box that's occupying defenders. Like there isn't, and then you can't just all go out and get, oh, quickly, there's Warchewski, like chuck him in, and you can't always, Kwasi Poku doesn't become a great striker like for every team. So I know it's easier said than done, but when you've got that player in that centre forward that's really causing issues, it creates a little bit more space for these players. Daniels Ferrens had another fantastic season, but again, not quite wasn't able to quite do as much as maybe he could have if they can find an actual out and out striker that can link play, but also scare defenders into paying him more attention.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, Christian Walewski, I think, is a huge thing where it's like they brought this experienced striker in, never scored a goal, barely made an impact, and then just quietly left the club. That was a huge problem, because that's what they brought him in for, to be that big number 9, that experienced number 9 to lead the line, and he never was that. And then Patrice Geyser had to start to find different answers. Thiago Coimbra. Coimbra did well, and he did well in this game, of course, but he had a bunch of injuries throughout the season, so they couldn't even rely on him all the time. They had to throw in maybe Ryan Telfer up at striker, see if he could do a job there. And again, he kind of had some mixed games overall.
But he's not an out-and-out striker, is he?
Exactly. He's more of a wide midfielder. You could even say maybe he likes to be more of an inside forward when he's out on the wing, but he's not an out-and-out number 9. I feel like the recruitment needs to be better, because they did a really good recruitment, I think, in Patrice's first season with the players that they brought in. But this season, the recruitment, I think overall, we'll go more in depth when we do the Halifax specific postmortem, but doesn't feel like it kind of hit the same. And what I do like is that obviously Halifax, even though they weren't in the playoffs, they finished with their 2000.
They just get it.
God just got there with the under 21. Maybe hoping that if like a Forge or Cavalry forget or do miscalculations, they get qualified, Halifax somehow sneak in, so that they just cover all their bases. But I did like that they put those young players on, and the young players performed well. I thought Aidan Rushenos did well. I thought when what's his name, Alphonse played for Halifax. He played well. Obviously, Wesley Timoteo is a player that I know that when he did play for Halifax was a young player that I enjoyed. Thiago Coimbra when he came back from injury. Like they have a lot of good young players that I feel like
need a bit more time, don't they?
Need a bit more time, need to feature a little bit more. Obviously, it's difficult to find that balance between relying on your experienced players that can get you across the line and relying on the young players that have that youthful energy and confidence. But I feel like Halifax need to rely a little bit more on their young players, because they've shown that they are good players. And I'm not saying don't go out there and bring some more experienced players in. You definitely need some, but also let the kids play. I
Yeah,
feel like they should have a little bit more time for some of these young players because they proved in their last game that they're worth it. They can
yeah,
do a job and they can have an impact. Feel like that's something that maybe Patrice guys will need to maybe work on going into 2025 is how he manages the young players sort of development and playtime versus some of the more experienced players because that's the end at the end of the day that's one of the biggest reasons for the league, and he
mm,
admitted that himself afterwards in the post match to this game is that's one of the biggest things about the league. So he knows the importance of it. I feel like sometimes he just maybe coaches are scared to throw young players on because they kind of are throwing them into the deep end in big moments in big games. But you look at what Cholojimo is doing for York United.
yeah. Find the right ones.
Yeah, if you find the right ones, exactly, then they'll a lot of them will be throw them in. You'll have to see do they sink or do they float. Not everyone floats, but
Mm,
not everyone sinks either. Some of them take the opportunity really well. You saw
yeah,
last year TJ. You saw this year with Gimo. Next year we'll see who it is. Halifax have to think, well, why can't we have a 16, 17-year-old superstar
mm.
that ticks all the headlines, stuff like that. I think that's one of the things that they'll need to look into as well going into 2025.
Yeah. I mean, lastly on Halifax, like Dan Nemick, I'm assuming, and if anyone can tell me otherwise, this must be the highest scoring own goal season of any player in the CPL. It's for such a good defender and a goal scorer, he has also been putting it in the back of his own net in the most
Too
calamitous
good of a
way.
goal scorer. It doesn't
Yeah.
care what net it goes into.
Yeah, that surely can't happen again next year. But it may have had effects that could end up keeping him around in Halifax for another year.
That's true. I think he needs to switch his boots. I think the boots polarity with his own goal,
Yeah,
it's reversed. And no, you're right. Yeah, that guy needs if it's just pure bad luck, he needs to go. I don't know, to have a soul searching trip or
yeah,
something, or have just be cleansed of all of this bad juju that he got.
he's pissed off a witch in the off
Yeah,
season.
he's done something wrong. He's done something wrong for all the own goals that he's had. Because some of them have been just pure comedic. How
Yeah,
whack have they been? But yeah. I mean, we'll see what happens with him next season.
yeah.
Just for me, with the last thing I want to mention as well, just a glaring thing that we've barely mentioned is that they need to improve is their away form.
Oh yeah, of course.
They
Yeah,
had 1 win, 3
yeah,
draws, and 10 losses
yeah. It's pretty bad.
away from home.
Yeah,
6
that's
points
bad. Yeah,
from 14 matches.
yeah.
6 points from
So,
unavailable. What is
anyone
that?
who's only
42.
just getting involved in the league, like if you're a gambler, just bet on them. Don't bet on them losing away.
Yeah, they need to do better.
Yeah.
They need to do better. That is, I think, if you want to hold anything against Patrice Geyser, that is the biggest thing you can do.
Mm,
It's just their away form. It's unacceptable. 6
yeah.
points in 14 matches. That's
Mm.
unacceptable.
He must be terrible on a plane.
Yeah, that's fair.
He must be the worst passenger on a plane.
Yeah, genuinely. But that is all of our points that we could muster up for the end of the season. Thank you so much for tuning in every week to talk about all of the games that we go over. But we're going to finish off with going over our pre-season predictions, and with that, it is the return of our old graphics. And we're going to go
Oh my
through
god.
both of our predictions that we made, and I put them conveniently in a little table here. And we're going to do a little bit of a competition to see which one of us had worse takes at the beginning of the season. We're going to do a little point-based system. And for every position you get wrong, you get a point. And it's like golf. You want the least amount of points possible. And if you get that spot on, you get no points. If you get one off, 1 point, and so on and so forth. So we're going to start with Mike. And we're going to go through his table, the 8 teams where he put them all in. And we'll look at what the table actually looked like at the end of the season. So for his regular season champions, the ones holding the shield, he put Atletico Ottawa in first. They actually finished in third. So that's 2 points for Mike. Then he put Halifax Wanderers in second.
I do remember doing that. That's come back to bite me, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. To be fair, like as we mentioned, there's a lot of high hopes going into it. It's not like it was a daft take.
I did not think they were going to go with a back three to kick off the year.
Yes, to be fair, there was a lot of things we did not know. We were not fortune tellers. But I think even in our wildest imaginations, we didn't expect them to be that poor throughout the season. So I won't even clown you that much. But unfortunately, that is 4 points for you since Halifax finished in 6th. Luckily, if not, it could have been 6 points had they continued to be at the bottom of the table. Then you had Cavalry in third. They finished second. Only a point. That's pretty good. Yeah. This one is also not that great. And I think we both did this. Forge in fourth.
Yeah.
Every season we say, don't doubt Forge. No. Every season we're like, maybe this is the season you doubt Forge. End of the season. What do we say? Don't doubt Forge.
I'll have him in 5th in the next prediction.
I don't think we'll learn, Mike. I think that's just the honest truth. I don't think us or anybody else will learn. You just death, taxes, and Forge FC.
Yeah.
These are just the constants in life. Then in 5th place, you got one right. You got Pacific FC correct in 5th place. Then you had your beloved Valour in 6th. They finished 8th, so that's 2 points. You had York United in 7th. They finished 4th, so that's 3 points. But then again, Benjamin Mora completely changed it for them.
Yeah.
I think maybe if they had stuck under Martin Nash, maybe they would be, kind of languishing in the bottom 3 places. Probably. So, probably not your worst take. Not your worst take. And then you had Vancouver FC in 8th. And I remember this one specifically because I thought this one was going to really bite you.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad, that one.
Especially with the start that they had. But no, in the end, you had them at a pretty good place in 8th. They finished 7th. So only 1 point for you. So
you did all right predicting those BC teams, didn't I?
Yeah, you did actually quite well predicting those BC teams. So in total, with all of the points that you got 16 points, which is not the best. Not the worst. Not the best. But we'll move on now to my predictions, which were a little bit different from yours. So starting off, I had Cavalry retaining the regular season championship in first. They finished in second, so that's a point for me. I had Atletico Ottawa finish second. They finished third. That's another point for me. I then had Halifax Wanderers in third. They finished 6th, so that's 3 points for me. The same thing. We both had high hopes for them.
Yeah.
Again, I had Forge in 4th. They finished first. That's 3 points for me. Once again, don't doubt Forge. Lesson of the day, kids. I then had Vancouver FC in 5th. They finished 7th. I'm not going to be too angry at that because they should have finished in 5th. With how with how long they were in the playoff places for. So that's 2 points for me. Pacific in 6th. They finished in 5th. Pretty close. That's 1 point for me. I had also York United in 7th. They finished 4th. So that's 3 points for me. Again, that's the Benjamin Mora tax.
Yeah.
Couldn't expect that. And then I saved the best for last in terms of getting one right. I got Valour in 8th place. So I got 0 points. And that is a total of, drum roll please, 14 points.
Oof. It was a lot closer than I thought it was going to be.
By 2 points. I think it was it was the Halifax Wanderers, I think, the one that got you there.
Yeah.
But I don't think either of us can be too happy with that.
No. Regroup, ready for a new season.
Yeah. I think this was one we kind of swiftly move on from. Nevertheless, it was a lot of fun, Mike, to go over all of the match days in this past season. Thank you so much to all of you who stuck around, even when we had a little break in the summer, listening week after week to all of our hot takes, our bad takes, and our a few good takes that we had.
One or two in there, weren't there?
One or two of them throughout the regular season. But don't go all teary-eyed now, because we still have a lot to go through with the playoffs, arguably the most exciting time of the seasons, the most wonderful time of the year. And we will be, probably releasing episodes thick and fast, as thick and fast as the playoffs themselves.
Yeah.
And then we'll have a bunch of fun episodes once the playoffs are done. Maybe going back to looking at team of the seasons, going over some awards, and doing the post-mortems for teams. So we'll have a lot of ideas and a lot of episodes for you. Even after the season is done. So don't you worry, a lot more Coast to Coast FC content on the horizon. But thank you so much once again for listening to this week's episode. Make sure to follow us once again on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC, so you can give us your thoughts. What do you think of our predictions? Do you think, 14, 16 points was pretty bad? It's okay if you do, because I think so do we. Did you do any better in your predictions? Let us know, and if you make us laugh, maybe we'll give you a shout out in the next show. But until next time, until playoff time, I'm Felipe Warchewski.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And this has been Coast to Coast FC, signing out.